Hey, welcome to Living High, Wild, and Free. In today's video, we're going to cut through some of the mysticism when it comes to lure selection with freshwater species of fish. And we're going to focus on color of lure for lure selection in freshwater species of fish. And now, what I mean by that is, does color directly correlate to number of fish that is caught and also size of individual that is caught. And well, for those people that don't want to sit through the whole video and, hear the nitty-gritty of all the details of the scientific facts, is that it kind of does, but not as much as lure companies would like you to believe. And if you'd like to find out more, then just stick around.
Living on wild and
All right, let's get into it. For those of you that are returning to this channel, thank you so much for your continued support. I really appreciate it. And for those of you that are new, let me introduce myself. I have a bachelor's and master's degree in wildlife biology. And my academically, I have specialized in wetlands and waterfowl. However, I also have a lot of fishing guiding experience in northern Minnesota and northern Canada. So I have my own applied testing that I've done over the years. However be it, academically, my discipline varies from fisheries biology. Just so you know this, I want to be myself transparent that I'm not an expert in this field, but I am a enthused fisherman that also has a scientific background. Let's get into actual lure selection, and you can see that I have bought into all of the different colors and all this stuff, and I feel that this gives me confidence out on the water to have all of these different colors to choose from for different varying conditions and so on and so forth. But after my research, I've concluded that it really doesn't matter. Why do lure manufacturers present all of these different colors and all of these different variations and patterns and so on and so forth? And I really think it comes down to that there is a bit of mysticism when it comes to catching fish, right? Because fish aren't just, you can't see them as much. Now with technology, you are able to see more and more of the fish's reaction when it comes to lure selection. However, there is still a bit of that mysticism of finding the right place, finding the right conditions, where the fish are feeding, and so on and so forth. And we can kind of in the variables that we can control, like lure selection, becomes overly saturated with different options. And because, of capitalism and so on and so forth, like manufacturers are more than willing to produce all these different variations of different lure types and blah, blah, blah to try to attract that purchase of a fisherman. So I think to start off this video, we really need to discuss and really get it in the back of our minds the human bias that humans, our sense of eyesight is incredibly important to us. That through evolution, that we actually stand up, we're bipedal, so we stand up on two legs so we can look out. Our eyes are in front of our head, and we also have a very in-depth sense of color. The cells in our eyes are designed to give us a very large range of what we call visible color. So from our reds to our violet colors, we have a very in-depth understanding, and our eyes perceive that very well. And it's in comparison, there's very few species of animal that can see as well as us. And so our bias is that all animals are like that, and that's just not the case. Most animals actually don't have a relatively good eyesight. Now, they have it good enough depending on the species and the conditions that they're typically in. They'll have good enough eyesight that they can navigate and live successfully. Out on the ice, out ice fishing in northern Minnesota, we were on a big lake, and there was a slight breeze coming from my back, but looking forward to the sunset, just amazed. Like, it was just a beautiful, deep hues of red and orange and yellow, and just really beautiful, beautiful sunset. And I'm just sitting there in awe of this amazing experience. And my dog is sitting right next to me, and I look down at him, and his back is turned from the sunset, and he's sniffing the wind, and you can tell that he's enjoying it just as much as I am. And, it just really dawned on me. It really made me really solidified this idea that even though we're in the exact same spot, the exact same conditions and time, that we're having totally different experiences. He's smelling wind coming off from shore, and I'm sure he's smelling deer and, wolves or whatever. And here I am looking at the sunset. And that to me summarizes how animals, like, through different species and different family groups, experience the world in totally different ways. And fish are just the same way. They're experiencing their surroundings much, much different than how humans experience the world. So, as humans, we put such an emphasis on eyesight, whether it be camouflage during hunting or lure color and patterns on those lures and so on and so forth. Like that, it to us is most important, but to a fish, it's marginally important. That we have to remember that fish actually, depending on the species, of course, actually interact mostly through sense of smell, hearing, and they also have a what's called a lateral line, which senses variation in water pressure. So they're feeling and sensing what's going on around them through a totally different experience than just their eyesight. And there is a variation amongst different species, how much they actually rely on eyesight. And different species of trout or salmon tend to rely more heavily on eyesight than, say, species like burbot or catfish. And then there's a huge gradient in between of different species that may or may not rely as much on eyesight over other sensories like hearing or their lateral line. The reason why I've created this video and why I started doing the research to begin with for this video was it's the beginning of the open water season, and I do an annual purchase of all kinds of different lures, primarily for lake trout that I want to test out, or maybe it's old stuff that worked and it's getting banged up, so I need to get some more of it or whatever. And I'm on different various online websites, and all of a sudden my cart just keeps growing and growing and growing because it's like I find a lure that has good action, that has a good presentation for what I want it to do. But of course, I need to buy, 4 different variations of that lure in different paint schemes because, oh, well, it's really going to matter in my mind. Like, oh, what if I'm up there and it's this, they're biting on this lure, but it's a totally different condition. And I really want to throw a different presentation, or maybe this is like this one paint scheme on this lure. That's going to be the ticket. That's the one that's going to give me the big fish that I've been looking for, and it just gets out of hand, and I've been doing that for years now, and so I really, started to really think about, like, as I watching my card fill up, and of course the the total price that I'm gonna pay at the end of it, expand, and I'm going like, "What am I doing? Like, does this really matter? I should put in the research, put in the time to really look into how much this actually matters and how much emphasis I need to put on different paint schemes on lures." What I've always thought is that lure selection really matters for the type of species because different species see the world a bit differently. And it has to do with the cells that are in their eye that's receiving the light waves and transmitting it to the brain. Now, certain cells in the eye will specialize or only see certain things. Like there's certain cells that are really good at night vision. So fish like, say, a walleye that primarily hunts at night or in low light conditions will have cells in their eye that are really good at picking up low light, but those cells are very bad at seeing spectrum of color. So those species of fish, I always assume like it didn't matter as much, or I would always, present very bright colors because I always thought that their eyesights were bad. And then in comparison to like, say, a lake trout, their color vision is actually pretty close to what a human is. So I always thought that color really mattered for lake trout species. And so hence why I have multiple tackle boxes full of the exact same lures that just vary in pattern of color, different color schemes, and so on and so forth, because I thought that really, really mattered. And what I found in these articles is that it's not so much on the species of like the eye type that the species has, whether it's an eye that's designed for low light conditions, or maybe a species of fish that really doesn't rely on their eye very much, or like a lake trout where they really do. It actually where color really starts to matter is the depth of water and the clarity of water, right? And so it's about light transmission throughout the water column. And so what I found really surprising was it was the amount of available energy within that color, because we have to remember that color actually really only represents the intensity of the energy of the light source, right? And so reds tend to be a lower energy color, especially compared to like a violet. They're both on ends of the visible light spectrum. And so reds actually dissipate throughout the water much more quickly than, say, a blue or a violet. By color, the maximum depth that can be reached by red is 15 feet. For orange, it's about 30 feet to 35 feet. And for yellow, it's about 60 feet. Green is 150 feet. And blue to violet is about 180 feet. And then on top of that, we also have to think of that that is in pristine, perfect conditions where there's no waves. The water clarity is perfect. I mean, we're talking about glacier lakes in the mountains or very offshore, like very far offshore, deep sea fishing type scenarios where it's just glass calm. The sun is at the highest point of the day, so around noon, let's say, it's beating down into the water, and there's also very little organic matter in the water. It's almost perfectly clean. Those types of scenarios is where we can actually see those kinds of light penetration down to 180, 200 feet of water. Whereas most likely, we're gonna be dealing with waves. Waves will, as the sun hits the water, bounce it and scatter it so that it reduces the amount of light penetration. There can also be a variation in organic material that's in the water. So we could think of like sediment. So, rivers where it's really turned up and muddy, those have a very high sediment loads, and light can actually, in some situations like that, can only penetrate less than an inch because it's so turbid and so much organic matter in it. Also, on top of rivers is turbidity, where maybe there's lots of rapids, lots of aeration of the water. We have wake, where those sorts of things will scatter light even more and reduce the amount of light penetration. And also with organic matter, we also can think of like northern lakes where what's called staining, and that's just from water seeping through the ground, collecting organic material like through sphagnum bogs and flowing into lakes, and it gets that kind of brownish hue to it. It has nothing to do with the water being clean, but it's really that there's just a lot of organic matter in that water, and that's what's giving it that color. And so all of those different factors can influence how much light penetration is actually coming down. So the ability for the fish to actually see that lure could vary. Now, if there's available light, even a red hook that can only, say in perfect conditions, the light, you can actually only see the color red about 15 feet down, that it doesn't mean that that lure just disappears. It becomes kind of murky in that, like, it's not reflecting back that reddish, bright red color, let's say. It's actually just going to appear kind of grayish to maybe there might be some other hues in there. So there might be a little bit of yellow coming through, those sorts of things that are still able, like the fish will obviously be able to see it. It's not like it just goes invisible, but it doesn't pop in my studio lighting scenario where we're seeing, lots of different, different colors and hues, even just within that red, like we're seeing the full spectrum. When it's down in the water, we might start seeing less and less of that red. It might become more and more darkish. so it's not popping as much. And so that being said, there is a caveat to all of this, and that being ultraviolet light. Ultraviolet light is a very high energy light source that humans can't perceive. Like we can't see it, but there are various different species that can, and some species of fish can, and some can see it very well. So, like again, the trout and the salmon actually see ultraviolet light fairly well. And it's theorized that they use it for mating and also catching prey. That even in scenarios where there's very little visible light, there can still be the presence of ultraviolet light. And so those species of fish can use that to hunt and predate certain different species of fish, where, say, a largemouth bass has no ability to see ultraviolet light. So that has no effect on them, and it makes sense, right? Like largemouth bass tend to stay in shallow areas, and they're feeding on species of fish that are visible. Like they're not like small plankton. Like some marine animals can see ultraviolet light because they're feeding on plankton, which can be seen more easily through ultraviolet light. Whereas largemouth bass, they don't need that at all. So it makes sense and there's a large gradient of different species of fish that I don't want to get into within this video, but it's very easily accessed on the internet. If you're curious if the species that you're targeting can see ultraviolet light. And so why does that matter with lure selection? Well, my favorite, chartreuse, and the reason why it's my favorite, and I found out this, is that it's very easy to see with ultraviolet light, and I'm gonna kill the studio light so that we can see it under a black light. Alright, so I have my studio lights turned off, and I just have the, window open that's letting in some sunlight here so you can at least see my face, and I've got one of these just cheap little black lights that you can get on Amazon, shipped direct from China, and I just wanted to just demonstrate a simulation of what fish are potentially seeing underwater using ultraviolet rays with the black light. And we can see that certain colors are illuminated even more than with just visible light, that the ultraviolet light is making them, say, pop a little bit more. Okay, so with that little bit of a demonstration, it really goes to show that with certain species, those more fluorescent colors can really add an extra pop in the water. And, with the chartreuse, the pink, the bright orange, and also bright red can actually, even though, say, red dissipates in the water column very quickly, with ultraviolet rays, it can actually pop underneath the water in certain conditions, and add an extra enhancement when you're out fishing. And so with that quick demonstration, we start to see how those fluorescent colors actually get illuminated under the water underneath ultraviolet light. And for those species that can see ultraviolet light, it could pop more underneath the water and attract them to come in and look at the lure itself. And in certain light conditions, like low light waters, whether it's in the dusk or early morning, or say like lots of wave action, high organic matter, so lots of turbidity along with lots of sediment or what have you in the water where the light penetration is very low. That's where those fluorescent colors can really start to pop and bring in fish, whereas darker colors give that other contrast in very clear water with high light conditions. There's that the darker colors like blues, purples, even black can serve as that contrast to stick out in the water to attract those fish. And to me, that's what color really is good for, is serving as contrast in certain lighting conditions to bring in the fish, to get them curious that they're going to come and check it out. That fish to bite is a totally different matter, and I really don't think that has anything to do with color selection. There can be caveats to that. Obviously, there's nothing that is 100% where maybe in high pressured waters, certain paint schemes can serve as an extra confidence or luring in fish to give a curiosity bite that, oh, I haven't seen that before. Maybe it's not maybe it's actually food and not a lure. Let me try kind of thing, right? I could see that argument being made and it being true, but for the most part, color is to give contrast to let the fish zero in on that target, on that lure, and then other things like vibration of that lure, like how much pressure changes that lure is giving off that might enhance or bring a fish to get curious enough to strike it. That might be, I would say, is more of a determining factor in the actual strike itself or like smell that fish will actually gulp in the water around it as they're pushing it past their tongue and through their gills that they can actually taste that water and taste your lure before they ever even strike it. And they also have a decent sense of smell. And of course, this all depends on the species of fish. Like bourbon and catfish have an unbelievable sense of smell that they can smell for a long distance away, and they'll actually bring them in to feed. Where other species like northern pike have a sense of smell, but it's not quite as acute as, say, a bourbon. Coming in and checking it out, they're using other senses to determine if that's something that they wanna put in their mouth. So color is a part of the lure selection for fish to actually hit it, right? That it serves as a contrast in the water to so a fish from a distance can see that lure and come in and assess it if it wants to strike or not. But it's not something that is determining that strike, right? That especially with, like, custom painted lures that, are very intricate and they have all kinds of different designs and everything like that. That is less so than if it's really trying to look exactly like the prey species that that predatory fish is going to feed on. Other than that, like, those flatfish that I was just showing, those look those almost look nothing like anything that's in the water, right? I mean, they have a very, very minuscule resemblance to any sort of prey species that's in the water. The color from a distance that's bringing in the fish, that action is getting the fish enticed to strike, and then the strike happens. Maybe I'll put some bait on there to give that sense of smell, that sort of thing in the water to encourage the strike even more. And that's really it, that I think action is more important than color itself. And it's important, color choice is important to give contrast. So in muddy waters or low light scenarios, having those fluorescent colors that can really pop in the water, or say like a white that's a total contrast color, versus in very clear and high light scenarios, having darker colors to make that lure pop. Other than that, lure color doesn't really matter. And what's important about lure color selection on your part is that it gives you confidence beyond that, right? That beyond that, just like simplification of different scenarios is that that lure gives you confidence. Hey, I've caught big fish on this, or I've seen somebody catch big fish on this lure. And so I'm gonna fish it with confidence, right? I'm gonna keep that lure in the water for long periods of time because I have confidence in it. And that of itself will allow you to catch more fish. And I think that's where all of these different lure selections and different colors and so on and so forth really is important, that it gives a fisherman, me included, confidence to stay out on the water. And it also gives me a variable that I can control that gives me the sense of confidence that I can go out and catch a fish. And me just staying on the water and fishing is directly correlated to me actually catching fish, right? And so that's where I think it's important. I really appreciate you staying all the way until the end. It really helps me out. I'm going to continue to produce these more scientific based videos, and they're not just gonna cover fishing, they're also gonna be covering different aspects of wildlife, including hunting aspects, and really challenging a lot of these misconceptions or the mysticism that goes around hunting and fishing because of all of the different variables that influence whether a successful harvest has taken place or not. And so that's my goal, and if you'd like to follow along, then please think about subscribing. But as always, keep living high, wild, and free.
Living